Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, and welcome to this panel on learning and capacity building in public administrations in the multi-level context of EU policies. How can we help make it work? If you're tuning in now for this session only, welcome to the celebration of the 40th anniversary of the European Institute of Public Administration. Now, after having explored the new approaches to ensuring effective policy implementation in the previous panel, we are now turning to EIPA's core mission. We will explore learning methods that deliver in a multi-level administration system. We will address capacity building tools for effective implementation, and we will draw on comparisons to address current and future challenges faced by public administrations at different levels across the continent, but also beyond. My name is Sabina Lange. I'm faculty member of EIPA, and it's my pleasure and honor to be able to navigate an impressive panel of experts through these questions. I'm joined here in Maastricht and virtually from Paris by, let me start on my right, Mr. Edoardo Ongaro, a professor of public management at the Open University in the UK. Edoardo's co-authored book on strategic management in public service organizations brings together an impressive body of comparative research with a view to its practical application in the public administrations, and this is what we will also draw on in the coming hour. Now, joining us virtually from Paris is Ms. Elsa Pilichowski. Hello, Elsa. Director for Public Governance at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Elsa joined the OECD to work on public governance more than 20 years ago and has dedicated her time ever since to public governance in different positions across the OECD. Finally, Daniele, Dotto on my left, is acting director of a directorate supporting the member states' reforms in the Director General Reform of the European Commission. Daniele is the head of unit on governance and public administration, which, among others, is responsible for technical support for reforms in the area of public administration and governance. Now, before I pass the floor to the distinguished panel, allow me to explain how we will proceed and how to bring you, the audience, in. After the introductory remarks by each of the panelists, we will hold a round of exchanges within the panel before opening the floor to the audience. This is a hybrid event, so we have audience here in the room. Welcome. You're kindly requested to raise your name tag to indicate the floor request. If I don't see it, raise it higher. Thank you. Please use the microphone when you're addressing the panel. For those following online, please submit your questions and comments in the dedicated chat section. I encourage you to enter these questions and comments as we go to allow us to connect, complement, and address as many of the issues that you will raise. Now, Edoardo, you have done immense research, as I already mentioned, on best practices in public service organizations and management. What does learning from practices mean in today's fast-changing environment of public service? And how do we learn from practice for the future?
Thank you, Sabina. Thank you very much, Marco, Edward, and everyone at EIPA. Congratulations to EIPA on its 30th anniversary. As an academic, yes, but an academic allocated only 8 minutes for this introductory remarks. I will not say it depends and just make some statements, claims, but just wanted to assure everyone that there is some academic research underlying it, and in those books there is a lot of it depends. So, just to be. So learning from practices is crucial for present-proof public managers and public management and policy, and EIPA, OECD, the European Commission, DG Reform, do a fantastic job in this regard. But my initial claim is that also anticipating futures is equally crucial, and the practices may get us stuck somehow in path dependency, in replicating the present. So what we need is both a present-proof and, second claim, a future-proof public manager. Critique, I know, the usual mission impossible for superhero public managers. Well, not exactly. I think this is absolutely possible, but two things out of many are particularly important for achieving a both present-proof and a future-proof public manager. First thing, and this is the very topic of the panel, recognizing the complexity inherent in learning from practices. Learning from practices can be very useful, but it is, in effect, a very complex process, as also EIPA experience knows, and you show us the complexity of this. It involves, first, detecting practices that are truly, if not best, at least good enough. Second, it entails identifying the mechanism or mechanisms embedded into the practice that brings about the desired outcome or outcomes on the given organizational or policy system. And before that, what exactly is the desired outcome, which is not so easy to find agreement on. This may be a contested definition. And what are the undesired side effects that always are brought about when you trigger a new social mechanism having an impact in terms of real change in a societal system. Third, you need to identify the context conditions under which the mechanism operates, and, complementary, but fourth, defining the conditions for replicability of the mechanism embedded into the practice that worked in one side to be sure it produces similar effects with limited side effects in the other site, in the other place where it is applied. So practice extrapolation is a crucial business for everyone in this room, for EIPA, for OECD, for DG Reform in the European Commission, for the academia, which is why I tried to theorize how to do it in a very practical way in the book Sabina so kindly just mentioned. But we need to recognize the inherent complexity in it to be able to succeed rather than stirring some more trouble and confusion into the system. Yet, and this is my very final claim, so I hope I'm sticking to my allocated 8 minutes or less, it is not enough. There are some substantive reasons why this is the case. Replicating practices, which of course is very important, has inherently a logic of replicating what is present, which means might blur at least the view on what will be required very soon in the future, for all the reasons widely discussed in the previous panel and of course by Alexander Stubb in his remarks. How to anticipate possible futures, which to me is part and parcel of this work of building capacities, resilience, and learning from practices by putting practices also in a broader framework, conceptually. How can we anticipate possible futures? Of course, the list would be very long by triggering learning processes across policy communities and organizations, by analyzing psychological attitudes. European cultures are too prudent, wary, overly cautious towards the future, and so on and so forth. I will just highlight one point, which is my final statement. And I think we also need the right to use, without worries, the right conceptual tools. I think that if we use very, very traditional, very European Aristotle, reality exists in actuality, here and now. We are in this panel, we are in this fantastic 40th anniversary seminar, and in potentiality, what may happen, might also not happen, but may well happen, and also very soon. To understand what may happen, we need models, we need ideal types, we need paradigms, and we need to think in a utopian way. I'm not exaggerating. I will just hint to this. Of course, we need analytical models which may anticipate things that will come. New approaches, new reform, digital era governance, what is it? We work out a model, we try to see what it may entail and to anticipate this future and do training to prepare public managers to cope with this future. But we also need ideal types. Come on, this is a concept, of course famously worked out by Max Weber, which has been applied basically to one word, ours, the ideal type of the bureaucracy. But why don't we use ideal types, new ideal types, integrative governance, collaborative governance, in the same rigorous way? An ideal type is an on-purpose accentuation of one or certain aspects of a phenomenon in order to have a yardstick against which to compare our reality so that we can see how distant we are from there. Maybe we want to go far from there. I'm not saying we all want to go towards more bureaucracy, old sense, but we need to this conceptual tool to understand it. We need to reflect on paradigms. Digital era is bringing a change in paradigm. Greening, in the broader sense, is bringing paradigmatic changes. Comparing with the other poles in the world, to go back again to Alexander Stubb's remarks, entails understanding the Confucian paradigm of public administration to learn from it through comparison. I'm doing a lot of research, as you may have surmised, on the Confucianism and comparisons with the EU and European public administration in general. We need this set of broad principles to understand how the future might look like very soon. And finally, and this is really finally concluding my introductory remark, we need to think teleologically, meaning from the goal, backward mapping to where we are, not to get stuck, so I go back to my initial point, into the present. If we want to be there, Europe 2050, 55, what do we do? Backward, but we need this exercise in thinking in a utopian way, because at that moment that word is nowhere, so literally utopia, in no place, but then work our way back conceptually to here. And this is a kind of conceptual tools which I think we should use more and more in research, in teaching and training, and of course in the practice of public administration and public management. So, very kindly, Sabina, you mentioned the book in which you work on the protocol for the extrapolation of practices, which is tried to be rigorous and which uses the cases created by studies of EIPA and other OECD and European Commission, and of course academics. We also need, which is why I wrote another book, which is also available open access and in 4 languages, including Chinese, okay, you got my point, philosophy and public administration, because I think we need to bring these ideas and also set back in how they were originally developed by philosophers into our world of public administration. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Edoardo, for this future-oriented modeling and ideal type formation need for that. I'm sure there will be questions on the last element of the utopias. But let me turn to Elsa next, to Paris. Elsa, thank you for joining us. What lessons could be drawn from the OECD's rich experience in learning and capacity building, and how do we translate best practices in policy practice? We are waiting for Elsa, if she's joining us. I'll wait for a sign, and if not,
She disconnected. She's not here.
I'm being told she's disconnected, so allow me to then turn to Daniele, and we'll come back to Elsa when she connects. So we're coming to the EU first, and then we're going to more broadly to the OECD. Well, you work in the European Commission, so we're turning to the gist now. What kinds of capacity building tools and peer-based guidance is the Commission offering to support national administrations, again, in these times of change?
Thank you. Thank you, Sabina. Good morning to everybody. Allow me to have 10 minutes and 30 seconds, and I would like to use the 30 seconds to wish a very happy birthday to EIPA. 40 represents a landmark in one's life, and one says that life begins at 40, meaning that when one reaches that age of 40, long ago for me, life becomes better. Maybe because one has skills, experiences, and means necessary for an enjoyable life. And I'm pretty sure that EIPA will now know how to live an even more enjoyable life for its second round of 40. So happy birthday. We're waiting for the cake. Coming now to our favorite topic, the quality of public administration. This is, of course, critical for the functioning of the European Union. It's critical for the recovery from the crisis that hit us all badly and does not seem to promise to end soon. I think we all have under our eyes the latest developments, and yeah, we have to be careful. But more positively, the quality of public administration is critical for the successful attainment of our long-term EU goals of making Europe resilient, fair, sustainable, green, digitally advanced, and an even better place for the future generations to live in. Public administration at multi-level, national, regional, and local level deliver crisis responses, provide services, implement reforms, manage investments, and more generally manage public spending to create the expected social value. They have a key role, public administration have a key role in the national context, but also in the EU context, as they translate EU law and programs into concrete actions with long-term effects on economic, social, and territorial cohesion, as well as on technological progress. Public administrations are responsible for the effective and efficient uptake of the EU funds. They play a fundamental role in preserving EU's shared values. We referred to that earlier on. Now, considering the urgency and the complexity of the current policy agenda to resolve the difficulties and to prepare the economies and the societies for the future, investing in the quality and capability of public administration often receives less than needed attention. And while this was somewhat considered acceptable, socially acceptable, and even pushed by some austerity policies, it is reconforting now to see that an increasing number of countries realize that such efforts will have a double payoff. They will reduce the administrative costs, speed up administrative operation, but they will have wider societal effects as more innovative policy solutions, citizen-oriented services, more favorable environment for economic and social transformation, better quality of life come in. In the Commission, we are convinced that adaptation of the public administration is a high priority and deserves special attention. In addition to the reasons that I just mentioned, it is concerning, however, to see that the gaps in terms of administrative performance remain quite high within the member states and across the EU member states. In terms of government effectiveness, trust, satisfaction with public services, business environment, digitalization, notably. There is an increasing number of studies, and we are going to launch one, that try to measure the cost of lost opportunities because of weak administration. EU study estimated that economic costs associated with failure of national public administration to implement the environmental acquis is about 50 billion euros, including cost for infringement cases. Another recent research of last year indicated that bad quality public administration could cause up to 45% GDP loss in the COVID crisis. This is all, of course, but negligible. In addition, EU public sector is, as we know, EU biggest industry. It employs around 75 million people, 25% of the workforce. If you add to this the number of people that work as contractors to the state, then you end up with an impressive figure. And at the same time, after COVID, public expenditure has increased in some countries to about 60%, 60 of GDP. Therefore, ensuring public sector productivity is therefore indispensable. Working with taxpayers' money is a special responsibility, and we all want to produce good, perfect, absolutely brilliant value for money for citizens. The public sector must leverage its authority and resources to promote disruptive technologies and innovate, financing partnerships to address the challenges posed by climate change. This requires that public administration disposes with talented and dedicated people that choose to have a career in the public service, that are engaged and motivated and open to continuously learn. Moreover, about half of the EU member states will see as much as a third of their civil servants retire in the next 15 years. In two countries, Italy and Spain, we are talking about half of civil servants there. This is a huge turnover that brings, of course, opportunities, but also the challenge of recruitment and ensuring a proper working force, but also making sure that we have stability and continuity of the administrative systems. And while our world is changing really fast, public administration is exposed to a double challenge: facilitate the adaptation of the society and economy and adapt internally. The nature of work is changing. The public sector often tends to trail behind the private sector, but the COVID has demonstrated and pushed us to be at the forefront, as we heard also eloquently from Alexander Stuck this morning, of change, as we need to ensure continuity. All public administrations are going through reflections, how to build more flexible workplaces, how to deal with an aging workforce, how to build diversity, adapt to new technologies and meet employees' expectations. The European Union has provided a lot of funding instruments, but one key lesson for us, having about 20 years of experience now with administrative modernization in the member state, is that money is important, of course. L'argent est le nerf de la guerre. But knowledge is even more important for deep, sustainable adaptation. This is why, in addition to funding instruments that support administrative reforms, we have added many tools and possibilities. And I will come to the point of Sabine. First, the technical support instrument, which is the tool that my Director General, DG Reform, manages. And it's one of probably the newest tool that brings tailor-made expertise on the ground. And I refer to a comment that was made before, to help the member states design, develop, and implement growth-enhancing reform in basically all EU policy areas. We cover the whole reform cycle, from identifying reform needs to implementing, monitoring, and evaluating the outcomes of these reforms. The support we provide tape on knowledge and experience of public administration in Europe. So there's also a lot of peer experiences, OECD, there's EIPA, a lot of intervenants come also into the picture. We work through experts, indeed, and fact-finding missions on the ground to assess the situation and then cooperate to develop and implement targeted solutions to address the situation. It's a demand-driven instrument. In other words, if there's not a request from the member state, there's no action. So that's where we really invite the member state to talk to us, to join us in this respect. Recently, we have started to promote experience sharing and mutual learning through what we call multi-country projects. In September, for instance, last September, we have launched implementation of a project initiated by Belgium, and now we have 12 member states on board, that will explore how the CAF, the Common Assessment Framework, can help build resilience and adaptability in public administration. The CAF is very close to the heart of EIPA. As a resource center for CAF, you have a pivotal role in promoting and building capacity. And this explains why EIPA is also a partner in the project. OECD will carry out the analytical work, and this collaboration will give the opportunity to tap on the knowledge of the Public Governance Committee of the OECD and its working parties. I would like to mention, digital and green are all over the place, and I would like to mention the support that we provide for the implementation of the European Green Deal. As we know, economic growth will be based, among other things, on the green transition. With a range of tools, public administration enables the achievement of the 2030 Sustainable Agenda, which is at the heart of the European policies. More generally, public administration must be seen as a component of a broader community, integrating departmental efforts across the enterprise and always considering the effect of government initiatives on the broader ecosystem. In that context, DG Reform is engaged in over 1,000 reform projects in all the EU 27 member states, and about 20% of those contribute to achieving the goals of the Green Deal. The list of examples is long. I don't have time to go through that. It's very difficult for me to choose among them, but just let me mention the support for developing climate policy, including advice on climate strategies and action plans, support for modeling greenhouse emissions. I have a full page of examples. We can elaborate on that. I promise I will not do that. We have many other activities. We do help identifying challenges in a way that is discussed. It's the European semester and the new rule of law report. These are the most well-known mechanisms. We produce a number of scoreboards that provide an overview of the performance of the member states' public administration and help to understand the root problems, for instance, the single market scoreboard, the justice scoreboard, the DESI indicators, and others. We are now working on an assessment framework that covers the key aspects of public administration, like policy making, civil service, service delivery, transparency, accountability, and financial management. The idea here is to work with the member states to have a set of indicators to be able to capture the quality of public administration. We have many other cases. Sabina is soon going to pass me the 30 seconds sheet, so I will stop here. But we do work a lot with guidance, peer review recommendation, etc. So I will conclude by, of course, referring to the Public Sector Award that we support with EIPA since 2007. And to say that while we're indeed offering a lot, and again, time is tyranny, but we could go on for quite a long time. We're determined to further reinforce the efforts and make our collaboration and support to the member states more tailored and need-based. And notably, one, through better disseminating our country and thematic knowledge. Second, have a stronger focus on the needs of the regional and local administration. Third, build a regular dialogue with the member states on the issue of public admin. And fourthly, reflect how the Commission can facilitate better peer learning and the promotion of EU administrative principles and standards. Thank you very much, and happy, of course, to elaborate further on this and other. Thank you, Sabina.
Thank you very much, Daniele. I would sure be interested in an elaboration on one of the tools and in connection between the tools and the Green Deal, so more deeply into that. But I hear Elsa is back online with us. So, Elsa, thank you for joining again. My question was, what lessons could be drawn from the OECD's experience in learning and capacity building? And as we are moving from academia to praxis, so how do we translate best practices in policy practice, best practices from learning into policy practice? You have 8 to 10 minutes. I will discreetly show a 2-minute sign.
In front of 300 people.
Thank you very much, Sabina, and dear all, good morning, good afternoon, dear Daniele, dear Edoardo. Let me just start by first congratulating EIPA on its 4th year's anniversary. I mean, of course, it's not a small feat for an institution. It means that you've managed to navigate through decades of different dynamics in EU integration and EU collaboration, but also really have proven your value in our rapidly changing times and an ever-growing complexity of topics. Let me say that I have just experienced major breakdowns in services, first yesterday at the train station and this morning in IT systems, and that I think it's very important that we continue learning on deficiencies and when problems happen, but my apologies also for not coming in because of the train and for leaving unexpectedly after an IT breakdown earlier. I want to say also that earlier this year we also celebrated the OECD's 60th anniversary, and that I think I was present at the 20th EIPA anniversary. I might not make it to the 60th. I might be retired by then, but it's an enormous pleasure, and I have to say that it's really remarkable how much our two institutions have in common from the very outset, when we started, you know, in the same context of growing cooperation, collaboration, and learning between countries, and still have today in terms of our professional values and what, to certain degrees, you know, our common members believe in. And above all, we share the same goal of strengthening governments to play a pivotal role in building a prosperous and inclusive society. And we do this through different types of actions, and you have already started mentioning it: analysis and research, policy advice, capacity building, and of course, you know, how we learn on all of this together. So on research and comparative analysis, you know, it's a core part of what the OECD does, which is to provide evidence-based nature of our capacity building and policy advice. Research, therefore, is not a standalone part of our work, but really crucial in strengthening everything we do. You may know about Government at a Glance, which is probably our most well-known report on public governance. But it would take you a simple scroll through our website to find, you know, the multitude of examples in a diversity of areas like HR, ethics, regulatory quality, digital government, public sector innovation, budget management, and many more. By the topics that we put on the table, because for us, everything starts with evidence-based and research and comparative analysis, and through the different angles we highlight in the debate, we also hope to influence how countries prioritize key capacities needed for better social outcomes. The research and analysis that we do end up often in standards, which is our soft law mechanisms, but we also consider things such as PISA, for example, almost a common standard. If it's not a legal standard in any way, at least it's a standard in values and how countries move together. So, of course, I mean, the data, the analysis, the recommendation help us with our joint work with countries for the best possible policy advice and support in policy implementation. Daniele knows very well about that. We're working increasingly with most EU member countries on reforms in public administration and in partnership, of course, with DG reforms, but also other partners such as Norway and the European Economic Area grants, and of course, bilaterally with individual countries. We also work with non-EU members, I mean the rest of OECD members, but also key partners such as Brazil, Egypt, Thailand, and for more than 28 years with the European Commission, we've been working under the joint Sigma program to support public administration reforms in EU enlargement and neighboring countries. And many of those are actually now EU and OECD members today. Capacity building at large brings our different areas of work together. By capacity, we of course mean knowledge, common understanding, skills, competencies at the individual level, We also mean the establishment and performance of systems, approaches, and ways of working at the organizational level, as well as the organization and interplay between different actors at government, civil society, private sector, at government level. So individual organizational government, but also the interplay with the rest of the actors. And I think that's a very important learning in terms of learning and sharing. One thought I would like to bring to the table is that in today's interconnected world, we see that this is probably not enough. What we need to focus more on now also quite a bit is capacity building for government's ability to work internationally. What we call now, we're starting to call for governments to be able to go global. Of course, many of the policy challenges faced by our countries are increasingly transboundary and global in nature. So it is becoming increasingly clear to citizens that in many cases their governments are not meeting their expectations of dealing with these global challenges successfully. We have recent evidence from Korea, Spain, Sweden showing that while most of their population believe that mitigating climate change will improve the lives of people, they are not willing to support future-oriented climate policies as they have little confidence in their governments to deliver in a meaningful way. So really going global is, for national governments to go global is becoming really a condition not only for delivering on the global challenges, but also for ensuring trust of citizens. Indeed, I mean, despite the fact that globalization has changed the way we produce and consume, of course, the capacities of governments have largely stayed national. And I think this topic of learning should really also open up ways for governments to, of course, reinforce international collaboration, but also start really opening this topic of what are the capacities needed together to deliver internationally. National governments have the primary responsibility to initiate global action, build coalitions of like-minded countries, negotiate international agreements, and finance and implement practical actions. So they need to step up their competencies to be up to these challenges and operate at the global level. We see a need to invest in a range of capabilities in governments, from building international influence to developing the right skills to collaborate across public sectors and ensuring access to and sharing data across borders. Of course, the green transition is a case in point on that matter. There are also new things that are very important to share learning of. And one of the big risks of learning within policy communities is that we stay within policy communities and forget about the big challenges coming ahead. Of course, Daniele talked about the green challenges. It's a topic that we have recently opened for public administration, how to gear up government to address the green challenges. And we have realized that governments had not really fully reflected on their own competencies and capacities to respond to climate change. And it's high time to do it because they are the ones steering in the future. So that's more or less what I wanted to say. I want also to really underline the very successful and long-term collaboration with EIPA. And just like last week, we organized a very successful and widely attended event under the auspices of the Slovenian EU presidency on government beyond recovery, which really highlighted the role of innovation and cross-border collaboration as we move from responses to recovery after the pandemic. This event drew over 2,000 participants from 117 countries. And this alone demonstrates a key desire really for governments to use the context of recovery as an opportunity for transformation and change in public governance approaches. And of course, Daniele has already talked about the flagship project, the Common Assessment Framework, CAF, and we hope that we'll be able to advance on this in the very future. So thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and honored to be working on this with you in really a true spirit of learning and building capacity together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elsa. I'll take with me the cross-border cooperation. This is a new element from this talk now. We were at the member states level or countries level. We were talking about what the European Commission does, what the OECD, but now what do countries do between themselves? And perhaps we could elaborate on that later. Now, this is a panel moving from the academic reflection to the practical application. And borrowing the concept of in-betweeners from Ellen Voss on the earlier panel, I'd like to see this panel, as well as EIPA, as the in-betweeners between the academia and the practice of politics and policy. So in the spirit of Alex Stoop earlier, we will try to answer what does it depend on, and I hope I'm not putting you too much under pressure. So what does it depend on? Edoardo, could I ask you to elaborate on the problem of extrapolation you mentioned before? I would be particularly interested in hearing your views on how do we apply ideal types as benchmarks of best practice in the context of unity and diversity in the EU.
Thank you, Sabina. We'll try a few elements of food for thought. Well, really, since lunchtime is also approaching. So, what does it depend on? I mentioned this. I think there is a lot of not just expertise, but awareness and academic systematization or systematic analysis into the use of practices, especially in Europe, because Europe is a natural laboratory for learning from different contexts within a framework which is also institutionally and culturally enables cooperation, and for this we have to be grateful to the European Union, of course, and to all those who have made it possible in the academia, in the world of practice, through pan-European working. But what does it depend on? I think that there is still a gap, hopefully a narrow one, but still a gap in terms of how we make the most of our work on practices. I know there are the sociology of knowledge approach. There are the pressures to immediately sell a practice as good, show that there are cases which are fit for purpose, and so on and so forth. And I know the immense pressures under which all institutions, the EU, OECD, EIPA, but also the academia in some sense is under. But still, this small gap, we can fill it. Reflecting seriously on practices that are truly good enough, and not circulating practices that are a little bit less doubtful on what is the mechanism and what they are producing, really. What is the mechanism embedded into the practice? Sorry, I insist on this. We never transfer a practice from one jurisdiction to another one, from one context to another. We understand what is in it that produces a certain outcome, which is a set of outcomes, more or less desirable, with the side effects. So we need really to do this job. We are nearly there, but at times there is this small gap still to be filled. We have to be clear, and I know this is politically difficult, I use politically here in the broader sense, to sell that to make everyone aware that in transferring a practice, you may also always have some side effects. Of course, if you are the one who is the institution, the organization, who is proposing it, or who is showcasing the great results achieved, it's contrary to human nature, not just but we need to be aware, and this is something that collectively we are nearly there, I think, best placed possibly in the world to do this job, as a continent, I mean, to do this job. And the conditions, final point on the first question, for replicability of the mechanism in the target site. I think academic research, I'm sorry, generalizing, beg your pardon, but has done a lot of progress. I'm a comparativist. Context and how context affects public administration and public management has been my research question over the entirety of my professional life. Impressive progress. I don't think it's just biographical. Oh, when I was young, I thought, now I realize. No, it's really objectively way beyond an individual contribution. Impressive progress in auto-analyzing contextual influences on public administration and public management, but we don't yet use it as systematically as we might, and we should, I think. And then the concepts that we may well employ. Again, I think a little bit, of course, the word practice has huge currency now. If it's a good practice, if it's sold as best, wow, we can say. But we can also sell ideas, which I know are a little bit more abstract, and there is this usual trap, whoever, let's say, but really trivialize it, politicians want concrete solutions. Okay, but concepts at times enable to identify fitting solutions to anticipate futures. We don't need to be shy in employing ideas like ideal typing or thinking about paradigms and then say, oh, let's have a look at how the world is when seen through that lens. Oh, it's slightly different, so we could do things differently, and this could enable change, I think, I hope.
Thank you very much, Edoardo. I'm turning to Daniele. I invited you to expand on one of the tools mentioned before, but allow me to add. You mentioned in the end that the Commission is strengthening the dissemination of acquired knowledge on the Member States. Could I ask you about the feedback from the Member State, about how does the exchange work, and what are you learning from that as well? Thank you.
Of course you may, and it's a very good point, because indeed now, as I said, with more than 1,000 projects on the ground of totally different nature and scope and breadth and depth, we see quite a lot of learnings from us and for and from the Member States. So the first thing is, if a reform, I think we all know this, right? If there's not a sponsor of reform in a Member State, the reform simply will not happen. So you need to have strong commitment. That's why we don't ask the Member States to put money on that, on the projects. We finance 100%, there's no co-financing, but we ask their commitment. And what goes wrong is often when the commitment fails because of a change of government or else, and therefore the project is dropped. So this is probably the biggest lesson that we have learned from these years of experience. And one important element, and I connect perfectly with everything that Edoardo said, is that we cannot, and the Member States do not want, rightly so, that we come with pre-cooked solutions. It simply would not work. It would be totally, allow me the word, totally stupid, foolish of us to go and say this is what it works. I like very much the distinction between the principles, how we can make it work, but then adapt it. And here, the other point that I have seen is sometimes some Member States fall in the identity trap, saying we're different, we cannot do it. No, you can do it. Everything can be done. I think, to quote Obama, yes, you can. The point is how far, how much, and how badly you want the change to take place. And this is where our work is, to make sure that we do understand what is at stake and how we can connect to the request. And the last point on this question is the risk of reversibility of reforms. Elsa spoke about the Sigma joint endeavor, that is to have the Member States, the candidate countries, to become or to prepare for membership. And we have seen after membership some reversal of reforms once you're in the club. So that's a point of attention, and we're looking carefully about that. But overall, the feedback, and we could share with Elsa no later than Monday, the feedback that we get from the Member States about the TSI, the Technical Support Instrument, is amazing. And if it has increased by 5 in just one switch of new financing program period, is because the Parliament and the Council were convinced that it worked when we were under the structural reform support programs, the predecessor. So that's for your point about the feedback with and among the Member States. On your other point, that is about climate, well, to connect local multi-level governance and climate change, just 4 figures are totally explain why we have to work also at that level. 70% of EU legislation is applied at the local and regional level. 70% of the climate mitigating measures are done at the local level. 90% of climate adaptation policy are deployed at the local level. And 65% of the SDGs are deployed at the local level. All these to explain, and I make the link with this environmental policy, that we have to take into account the local level. Otherwise, simply, it won't happen. I mean, it's good to have the capital saying what has to happen, but it happens at the local level. And therefore, we work at 2 levels. We work at the corporate level, which is to reinforce the governance, so to make sure that the local level, local and regional, I talk about the sub-central level, is strong enough. And there's a clear allocation of task responsibility. There's no gray area or black area or non-area. So we work a lot on this organization of the multi-level governance. We work on foresight, and that connects to something that Edoardo said about the working on the future. How can the local level be better at foresight? Because they need to concur with the central level about preparing the future. And from a technical viewpoint, and I stop on that, we have developed what we call our flagship projects. These are projects that we propose to the member state to develop jointly. There's one on multi-level governance indeed, and there are several of these projects there with climate adaptation policy. And here, just one I would like to mention, we do a lot of work on green budgeting in order to make sure that, similarly to gender mainstreaming, this green budgeting, gender-neutral budgeting, gender mainstreaming and green mainstreaming are brought in the reflection at the high strategic level in order to make sure that the data, when it has to be deployed at the local level, is on. So we do a lot of work, and in that context, the green budgeting is with 24, I think, 20 to 24 member states taking place. So there's a lot of peer learning and a mutual sharing of experience, which we think is the best way to overcome this identity gap and bring everybody on board. Thank you.
Thank you. Elsa, the OECD works with even more diverse countries than the EU member states are now, and yet you're proving that it can be done. So what does it depend on?
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, it's a very important question. In fact, I agree with everything that has been said previously in terms of not copying or not trying to, I mean, we have to learn, but learn and adapt, basically. I would say that the formula at the OECD is really based on three things. The first one is, I mentioned it, I mean, it's indicators, standards, and learning. I teach a course about these issues, and the first thing that I usually tell students is that the indicators that the OECD brings, it's like a dashboard with green lights and red lights. So it's the same thing for countries. When you look at, if you take public governance indicators and you take them all for a country, you see more or less where country X situates, whether it's in the average, whether it's ahead, whether it's behind. But these indicators it's not the OECD that brings the story. The narrative should be completely owned by the government. Why is there a red light somewhere? There's a reason, and that reason, the country has to find it and see whether it can address the reason. But it's not something that, there's no simplistic, if you want, or simple narrative behind a group of indicators. It's all something that is country specific. So we start with that is that we compare, we look for evidence, but then we work individually with the country to say what is the narrative behind these indicators. And of course, at the OECD, there are big levels of development difference between, say, Sweden and Colombia, for example. So the level of sophistication of public administration is very different. And of course, we adapt our tools and our policy advice depending on what the country is capable of doing and where it stands in terms of its sophistication from the beginning. So that's a little bit what it is. And I can tell you, for example, that we are doing public governance reviews now and readapting, because we think that the public governance reviews that look at the state of public governance in a country is not a product that is now adapted anymore to our most advanced members. And we are trying to now have a specific product for the most advanced members that look at really public governance in terms of what we see are the biggest challenges coming ahead. One being democracy, the other one being green, and the third one being digital, to make it simple. Instead of going through all the basics that the countries should have, and maybe, Sweden also has weaknesses and basics like every country. But this is not really what we find interesting right now for the most advanced countries, is how can we learn together on the biggest threatening challenges for public administration, green, democracy, and digital. We think that these are the changing factors for the future that will affect entirely the systems, and that it's more important to advance on this than it is to fill all the gaps that one country may have. So this is also what I think is important in terms of learning. There's not only learning about the practices, but that it's also agreeing among countries on what are the problems. because you can, even the best procurement system in the world is not perfect, and we can work forever on the procurement system to try to get the basics right. But by doing that, you might also be missing the big picture on, for example, moving to significantly transforming procurement towards green. And I think that what's important is to keep the dialogue on the big challenges, agree on these big challenges, and then adapt the learning to that. So these are my 2 cents for now on this question.
Thank you very much. I was promised 60 minutes to answer these valid questions, so I'm going to stop the clock now, pretending I'm the chair of the European Council, and I will allow us to go over for about 7 minutes, as I have questions from the floor, starting with Fedon Nicolaides. Fedon.
Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed all 3 presentations. Thank you. I think all 3 speakers referred to the concept of institutional capacity and a policy area where the Commission has tried to help member states to improve their capacity is structural funds. And that's a pretty good area to think about, because the managing authorities in each member state have to combine knowledge from different parts of law. Public procurement, for example, was mentioned. Now, and the relevant regulation requires member states to prove that they have the institutional capacity. Last week, the Court of Auditors published a report on this and said, yes, member states have the institutional capacity, but they have not produced the desired results. So, may I ask you to speculate as to why, on the one hand, you can have the institutional capacity and still fail to produce the desired result? What's the disconnect?
Thank you, Fedon. We will give up on lunch, I have a feeling. But let us try. Can I go in the reverse order now and invite you in a few words, if possible, to answer Fedon's question, which will then develop into, I think, a solid think piece in the future. So starting with Elsa, then going to Daniele, and finally words to Edoardo.
I can be very short. I mean, I don't know, I haven't seen the report of the Court of Auditors, and I don't know what they refer to, but in general, when there's institutional capacity and failure, I mean, the missing link is political leadership. So it's all about political priorities. And I think that's the lesson that we learned throughout the years on reforms and on making things happen. So very shortly, my answer.
Thank you. I haven't seen the report either, so we're learning something. That's the purpose of these events. Maybe, again, so I cannot comment on the report, but certainly one thing is that we are, on our side, working very closely with the colleagues from the DG Regio, DG Employment, to align this capacity building exercise, learning, as you say, from some very good experiences here. But the point you're making may be referring to the objectives. Are the objectives the purpose of the work clear enough? In other words, we are doing the right things, but we are doing things right, but are we doing the right things? I don't know. I cannot comment on this one. But I think it comes back, indeed, the political leadership is very important, but are we clear on what we want to achieve? If we take the example of building a road, yes, the road is perfectly built. Cars and trucks can go over it, but is the road useful? So, I mean, but that's a big question that we're not going to tackle here, that talks about national political priorities, European priorities, structural funds, etc. But I mean, we have to have the two things in mind, and it's maybe something that the court has addressed. I don't know.
Same caveat from me, so we all needed to read the report. But I may add that this totally complements what has already been said by Elsa and Daniele. I wonder whether the report might have been, as a social scientist, I ask the question, a little bit too polite. Capacities for what, and what capacities? I mean, there might be a sort of a static, capacities auditing is not just in the legal sense, but also in the, if you like, in the economic sense. What assets do you have that you can mobilize when needed? Might be very challenging in a sense to do. And at times what you have is, like for, and here I venture into a field which is not mine, but like for firms, they might have the assets to do the things they do now, but if something even slightly changes, those assets are not equally effective and efficient in a sense, but especially effective, as Daniele also pointed out, to tackle that other challenge. And it may be the structural funds, even if they're highly regulated, etc., in the current evolving, temporally changing context, those capacities maybe are a little bit more kind of on paper for things that are not exactly the ones for which they can be mobilized. Then, of course, political leadership and all the other things that Elsa and Daniele have already pointed out. Just my thought.
And this will be final thoughts of this panel. Allow me to thank you, all the panelists, for, I think, quite some tasks that you listed for EIPA in the context of our launch of the next generation EIPA. For those of you here, I have a pleasure of inviting you on a break, which means also for lunch. And for those following us online, we make now the clock ticks again, 85-minute break. We're back at 2 o'clock CET. Thank you very much for joining also later for a more politically oriented panel. Thank you very much.